Hey, this is Tim. I actually chose to do the Java part of the assignment, and for the unit testing, I did the counting the number of uppercase A's, and then for the Selenium testing, I did the Celsius to Fahrenheit conversion website. And so those are the two areas I'll be covering in this presentation. And hopefully you like the green screen. It's the first time I got to use it. It's not quite dialed in, but hopefully it's good enough. Okay, so yeah, for this part of it, I'll go to the number of A's, which is the unit testing piece. And basically the approach I had was I basically took, I don't know if you won't be able to see it, but I took a printout and just wrote out kind of draft ideas of what I thought would need to be tested with this for actually both scenarios, for both this one and the Celsius one. And then I went through and defined them all within unit tests before actually writing any of the code, because I kind of wanted to do it in a TDD style. So I wrote them, watched them fail, and then wrote the code to make them pass. And you can see how it's probably not the greatest. I'm going to see if it'll let me zoom in. There we go. And so I just did different combinations like we'd see. Like I tried just doing all capital A's or uppercase, and then all lowercase, make sure that the expected result for that one is 0. And then I went through a mixture of upper and lowercase A's to make sure that that count matched correctly. And then strings with no upper A's should be counted. And basically I did every letter in the alphabet except the capital A, which is missing, just to make sure that that returns 0. And then I did an alphanumeric test where I started mixing in numbers. And then I also wanted to make sure that there wasn't some sort of, depending on the implementation, obviously missing numbers, that the first or last number is something that can commonly happen when coding, just because loops not counting correctly and missing the last one. So I wanted to make sure that I had one scenario that had a capital A at the beginning and the end. And that one passed. And for that one, I also just put a random one in the center. And then this one was uppercase mixed in with special characters just to see if something, funky could happen. So I had that string and then an empty string just to verify that that returns 0. And then 1. That, okay. And then, so just to put a limit, I actually created 1,000 character string limit, just as like a defined requirement that I gave to the program myself. And so I created a string that was 1,001 characters long and made sure that it would throw an exception in that case if it tried to execute it. So then if we go back, hopefully this works. There we go. Nice. To the code, I basically implemented it a few different ways, but when I was looking online, I found it like a lambda expression that works really well. And since I'm also in the Java certification program here, the UW extension program, I'm trying to get more familiar with some of the more advanced concepts. So this basically is doing a character count. And here's where I throw that one exception if it's over 1,000 characters. So I had to write that to make it pass the test. And then they all started passing once I got that one line in there written correctly. And so I can run it right now. And then I'd also set it up for code coverage. I don't believe we covered anything with this, but I also have a code coverage set up so that you can see that everything turned green here, and you can see there's 100% methods and line coverage of this class and method. And here's all the results. They all went pretty quickly. The only slow one is that one where it's got that for loop that generates the over 1,000 character string. Other than that, it runs really fast. And that was it for the unit testing part of it. Okay, so for the second one, I did the Celsius to Fahrenheit conversion. And basically I did the same approach that we had done before. I used the recorder to record a brief script just so that I could see the basics. And then I had gone back and manually figured out the reset button and some of the other pieces that I tested. And I'll have to remind myself towards the end, like there were some things that I wanted to test that I didn't figure out how to test in Selenium that were more advanced than what we were probably doing, since it was going beyond just checking the inputs and outputs. I had wanted to test this like drag and drop functionality as part of the website testing, but I never got that far, and the recorder wouldn't record it. So it was going to be something that I had to figure out, that I just ran out of time. And so you can see it's pretty simple setup. And so, yeah, once I recorded it, like a basic test, I basically just done something like 0 just to make sure that returned 32. That's kind of the base case you would expect to work correctly, and that most people would know the point of freezing. And so I pasted the code in here, and then I'd wanted to also work on a few things that I'd looked into before, and that was being able to run against different types of browsers. I need to zoom in way more. Let's see. I'd wanted to be able to test against any one of the main browsers, Edge, Firefox, or Chrome. And I also wanted to be able to run them both headless and with the browser actually popping up. And then also to speed it up, I'd read about doing things like disabling extensions and GPU and stuff just to make the test run faster. And so I played around with some of those settings just to get more familiar with that. Except the only problem I ran into that with, no matter what I did, I had another like 20 lines of code in this area because I could never get the Microsoft's Edge to run in a headless mode. I initially had this headless with true and then with no value, and it just wouldn't set the capability correctly. And then as part of this too, I had set an implicit wait to 30 seconds, which is something that I see commonly done in Selenium scripts. And then I just went through a series of test cases that I created based off of kind of just, again, going back to the chart that I had written for myself here of different inputs that I thought would be good. And then I tried to do a couple things kind of just to make the scope a little bit better. And so I thought about it from like, if I was a tester and somebody gave me this requirement, who would I need to go talk to get some more detailed requirements that I could test against? Because this site's actually pretty wide open. Like there's not a lot of limits or anything, and it handles a lot of data efficiently. And so I didn't want to try to test everything. So I pretended like there was a business analyst that I could ask questions to, and same with a security analyst, because since it's a free form text field, you start worrying about some of the security vulnerabilities of having that type of field on a website. And so the limits that I tested to were 4 decimal places, even though it can do way more than that in there, and plus or minus 1 billion Celsius. So anything outside of that, I pretend like those were the boundaries. so that some of the tests make sense. So I just to have kind of that default case that everybody knows is setting Celsius to 0 and making sure that returns 32. Because that's such a common scenario that if that's not working for some reason, there's something wrong with the app. So I thought it was worthwhile to have that in there, and it's a 0. So, but not necessarily a boundary condition. I mean, it's a 0 within, a range of numbers. You understand? So then I did a negative. I wanted to have a negative number and make sure that came back correctly, and I wanted also to make sure it wasn't, some of my inputs had decimal places. So you'll see throughout the test that here's a whole number and this was a decimal. And then this was +1, testing +1, and it came back with the correct answer. And this is one thing where I actually made a note to myself, where if you input text, this one was no value, just hitting convert here, and it gives you this NaN. And like, in my opinion, that wouldn't necessarily be an acceptable return value, because it would be confusing to an end user, because that's actually a kind of a coding term that not a lot of people necessarily know. At least I don't think so. NaN is short for not a number, but you'd really want a better message than that. And so I still put it as a pass. I put that in there. But if this would have been something like real world, like I probably wouldn't, I would have fought that as a tester for it to be something else, or have some sort of error message or something, and not NaN. And then, then for this one, it's testing to make sure that after you get to this point, if you put a value in here, hit convert, I verify that if you put in 100, you get the two values back that you expect in these two particular fields. And I'm testing the reset button in this scenario. So I expected when I hit the reset button, and that's the X path to it, which isn't very good looking. And probably not maintainable if the interface ever changed even a little bit. It's sort of that they both get cleared. So like that. So both fields, make sure they both get cleared. And then I start testing some things that I thought might initially throw errors and things. So I put in a number followed by a decimal followed by nothing, just to see what it would do. And it just ignores everything after the decimal in that case and return a value. You could argue that should be an error message, but I let it fly since it did make sense. And here's the defining output to 4 decimal places to make sure that the input can go out to 4 decimal places, although the output goes out further. And then I did a negative number using that. And then I also, again, going back to the fact that it's a free form field, I wanted to make sure that it wouldn't evaluate equations and things if I put those in there. So I'd put in like brackets around -1 times 8, which you might get, I mean, if it evaluated, you get -8 in there, but it triggers an NaN value to be returned. And then here's the billion limit, testing up to 1 billion, making sure that that big of a number was still working, and -1 billion. And then, again, since it's a free form field, I wanted to see things like putting 2 decimal places and what would happen. And basically everything after the second one is ignored. So it's the equivalent of just putting 1.1 in. and you get 33.98. So I thought that was handled okay. Though putting in an alphabetical value, just making sure that wasn't a valid number. And then I did different combinations to see how it would work. And this one actually is one that did work. If you put the numbers before the alphabetical numbers, it truncates it. I mean, it just cuts off this piece and does 123. And then on the next one, I believe, let me see. Yeah, if you put the letters before the numbers, then you get that not a number returned. And then obviously special characters are another thing that would be interesting to see what would happen with it. So in that return NaN. And then I also had, yeah. And then so I looked at it from a security perspective too. Since this is you can enter anything in here, I wanted to enter in some JavaScript and look at if it would execute different forms of JavaScript. So I have 4 test cases, I believe, where I insert different types of JavaScript. So in this one, I inserted like a piece of code that might, if it was evaluated, throw an alert and take you to a page, but it is correctly not evaluated. Here's another little script that would maybe pop up. If it was evaluated, it has a possibility to pop up an alert, hello box. And then here's just another version of that. Just put in just a straight alert with just trying to get it to evaluate the code. And here's one where the brackets are actually translated like you would kind of see in a website URL. And so I tried that, but both of them successfully passed without any issues. And that was really it. And so, yeah, I mean, I can go ahead. This runs it. I believe it's going to run it. I think this is Firefox, not headless, obviously. Oh, it didn't actually run all the tests. Well, that actually gives me some time to look back up at what it's going to be running against. So it's running against Firefox and faults for the headless piece of it. But I might actually run through some of the headless. The headless actually isn't that much faster than the other version, unfortunately. Than actually allowing it. The one advantage obviously would be running it in an automated pipeline and utilizing a headless mode, so it could be possibly put into a CI/CD pipeline without needing the graphical user interface. So there's 20 tests, so it takes a while. I'm not sure exactly if we wanted to watch all these, but they do. They do all pass. And it actually doesn't take too long, so I'm actually curious to see if anybody else did this one and to see some of the test cases they came up with, because it was pretty wide open field to put input into. I think I put something, I put at least hundreds, if not over 1,000 digit number in there, and it returned the value. So it was going to keep going. I thought by creating a big loop and creating a really big number just to see if it could go. And I created one, and it took it a while, well over a minute to process, but it still did it. So that's another reason why I was like, well, I've got to set some sort of limits on this in order to test input and output on it at from a boundary heuristic. That's it. They all passed. And then, okay, just to really quickly, I'm trying to think if this is true. This one's even more boring because, like, doesn't actually show anything. Maybe I'll just run one just to show that, like, it doesn't. It's just neat that it can actually run and pull the code from the site, do the validations without needing to pop up a window. And so that would be running it headless. I just didn't want to see it. Still took like 7 seconds. So it's not particularly faster. I didn't look back at the video, but it's about the same, maybe 10-ish% or so faster than running it, launching the browser and running it too. So it doesn't save a whole lot of time. Just like I said before, it allows you to possibly do CI/CD, implement it into a CI/CD pipeline without needing a graphical user interface. And that's it for this one. So yeah, those were the two pieces that I covered for the final assignment. Hopefully I did a pretty good job. And hopefully this video comes out so that I don't have to present again in class because of technical issues, or I run out of time to actually put some of this stuff together because I'd never actually used any of this stuff before. So that's about it.